Sport continues to dominate the headlines in the first week of May, but not in a good way. Rotorua rugby fans have been anticipating the second local Super 12 clash of the year, with the Waikato Chiefs meeting the Sydney-based Brumbies. This team is captained by the talented George Gregan, a man who's no stranger to a bit of controversy and, it has to be said, as a key member of the Australian Wallabies, is less than popular with many New Zealand rugby fans. Nearing full time, with 12,000 spectators watching the Chiefs suffering a comprehensive defeat, George Gregan is on the receiving end of a moment of madness. Watching was Craig Tiriana.
George was behind a scrum and he got tackled. Now the strange thing about the tackle was it was by a spectator, not. And it was a young boy. He was about a 14-year-old Te Puke High School student, I think, from memory, who ended up getting marched away, but most of the crowd stood on their feet and cheered him because that was the thoughts. But that incident changed viewing for everyone in Rotorua from that day on. All of a sudden our ground had security. All of a sudden it meant, as a member of the media, we didn't have the same access we once had to our ground and everything. That really changed the landscape.
That isn't all. The incident provokes a great local cringe of embarrassment, as reflected by the next Daily Post headline. And the story is also picked up by the Australian press. With a full-scale media frenzy underway, the Rotorua PR machine goes into crisis mode. Mayor Hall offers George an all-expenses-paid holiday in an attempt to polish up the city's tarnished image. In fact, Rotorua's image has already been in the spotlight since the beginning of the month. Despite the completion of the Palisades at Hemo Gorge, this Daily Post headline has sparked discussion over finding a symbol that encapsulates the country's premier tourist destination. Something definitive, something with a wow factor. Of course, giant carrots, tin sheep and soft drink bottles are already taken. There is a flow of letters to both local papers with suggestions. But there are also plenty who question the need for such a symbol.
Personal view, I think, is a bit of silliness, really. I'd hate to think that we needed to find sort of one sort of edifice of some sort or whatever to be the brand of Rotorua, because we stand for so many things.
Councils in general went through this business of saying, we want to have something that's unique. It's a real icon for our city. We actually already had something in Te Whare Tonga o Te Arawa, the Art and History Museum, but we didn't quite see it that way at that stage.
Rotorua's May is starting to turn into a good news, bad news sort of month. On the positive side, the city's economy continues to look bright and jobs are reported to be plentiful. The Cat-Eye Moon Ride, canned last year with money problems, has a new format and will go ahead next month with fresh sponsors on board. There's also good news from the District Health Board, where management have cut next year's deficit from an expected $9.8 million to just over $4 million. But the incidence of meningitis continues unabated, with one child a fortnight being admitted for urgent treatment. And now there's also an epidemic of whooping cough. At Wairiki Institute of Technology, student numbers this year have been lower than expected, and staff redundancies are taking place as a consequence of the drop in income. Council debate over the accident-prone Arawa Street intersection has ground to a halt. The barriers have gone while consulting engineers work up a report on options and costs. Instead, underage drinking comes under the spotlight, and there's talk of getting tough with those businesses selling liquor to minors. At the very end of May, the District Council unveils a plan to transform the tourism landscape of Rotorua. Kuirau Park is to be given a facelift, aimed at turning it into a major visitor attraction. Costing an estimated $10 million, the planned development will feature 3 special character zones, including a new informal sports area and a spa complex, and add a counterpoint to the lakefront, the government gardens and the central mall. It sounds like a scheme to gladden the hearts of those who've been demanding some municipal vision and growth. Or maybe not. As June begins, the Queen's Birthday Honours announcement brings a special recognition for one of Rotorua's best-known citizens. Long associated with the village of Whakarewarewa, where she began guiding in 1938, at 83 years of age, Dorothy Bubbles Mihinui has had her lifetime of service to the local tourism industry acknowledged by being made a Distinguished Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit. And the Rotorua District Council doesn't have long to wait for feedback to their proposed scheme to redevelop Kuirau Park. Initially, this comes in letters to the editors of the local papers, suggesting there are plenty of issues more worthy of a $10 million spend than upgrading a park. A common theme that emerges is Rotorua's need for an improved indoor venue. The Sportsdrome has served the community well since it was completed in 1964. It was largely the result of intense community fundraising over 3 or 4 years that enabled the building, costing around $150,000, to be open debt-free. And for some years it was the largest structure of its type outside the major centres. But intervening time has caught up with the Sportsdrome. The modern requirements for venue standards in recent years have taken a quantum leap, and in the past 18 months there have been growing complaints ranging from lighting to the flooring and to the seating arrangements.
I got accosted by all the Sportsdrome's users, so mini ball and there was a whole heap of them. And in a very little room, there was about 10 or 12 of them, so it was kind of sardines all around this table, and they just let rip about the lack of community facilities and the fact that they couldn't get enough dates for fulfilling their program and all of these sorts of things.
Pressure is also emerging from some other directions. Okawa Bay residents are becoming increasingly vocal about the water quality in their corner of Lake Rotoiti after another bad summer experience. There has already been much talk about a sewage scheme for Morea. The cries for some action are becoming louder and are being clearly heard in the District Council.
Kuirau Park was really about competing with the lake water quality. When it came to spending $10 million on Kuirau Park, it became obvious that we couldn't sustain that sort of money being spent there when we had other issues like lake water quality.
During June, the Rotorua Airport debate is reignited. Last year, Environment Bay of Plenty floated the idea of a new regional airport. Now they've commissioned a consultant survey which supports the concept of a single international capable airport for the Bay of Plenty. And it's got some Rotorua interests hopping mad. The report particularly focuses on the importance of relocating Tauranga's airport, which cannot be expanded any further, thus freeing up valuable land for extra port and industrial use. The Daily Post breaks this story at a sensitive time, just as Air New Zealand is announcing the withdrawal of its Rotorua Whisperjet service. The replacement will be smaller ATR aircraft. There is to be no reduction in the number of actual seats available, but it revives all the old complaints about aircraft size.
We have markets that come into Rotorua, head south and then leave, or we have markets that come in South Island, head north and then leave. And that's the jet service, it's the capacity, it's not the fact that it's a jet, it's just that they can get enough people on it.
Both the Mayor and his deputy pour cold water on the idea that Paengaroa would be the ideal location suggested for the new regional airport.
Very, very difficult to get to solid ground at Paengaroa. You need to come inland. You come inland and you run into the hills. But the other thing, of course, is the cost. From greenfields nowadays, I'd say that type of airport, you're probably talking around about $75 million. The point is, can these communities afford that money? Is that the best preference for spending $75 million?
Mayor Hall attacks the report itself.
Quite honestly, I could say in my life, I always remember that report as being the worst report I have ever seen, and the authors of that report should never have been paid for it.
Then he goes further.
I've never been a fan for regional councils ever since they were first established anyhow, and you don't need them, you just don't need them.
From the sidelines, Steve Chadwick watches an unseemly altercation developing and calls for unity from both parties.
We had to stop all this mucking around about where this would be. So we finally took the bull by the horns that this was going to be the regional airport. And then that generated the next argument, was it Trans-Tasman or international? Well, Cullen and Anderton squashed it ever being international. It galvanised us all into agreeing that we needed a regional airport and we'd better get on with it.
Although a precise date is yet to be announced, 2002 is an election year. Only a few weeks ago, the Rotorua National Party selected their candidate for the contest ahead. To some, maybe even himself, Malcolm Short is a surprising choice.
Well, I was there by default because the fellow who was supposed to be standing, a friend of mine, ended up in a situation that he couldn't stand. So rather than go through a struggle to find someone else, and that I put my hand up. I was fairly confident at that time with the mood around the country that I wouldn't make it. So, but I was still prepared to try.
By the middle of June, the District Council had put plans for the redevelopment of Kuarau Park on the back burner. Feedback has made it clear that the issue of better indoor facilities for conferences and sport in Rotorua is more important to the community mind. Striking while the iron's hot comes Ian Edward with a plan to help solve the problem. He's heading a steering committee who want to build a large indoor stadium at Rotorua Girls High School. With a planned capacity of 3,000, could this be the answer to Rotorua's dearth of modern indoor venues? Ian Edwards' job will be to convince the district councillors to contribute funding to the $8 million cost of his project, when the council already has an established policy of not contributing to sports facilities in schools. Also in June comes news of great significance to the local forestry interests. After months of uncertainty, Fletcher Challenge Forests and the Chinese company CITIC want to forge a new deal involving 250,000 hectares of central North Island forests. The new structure would underpin the job security of hundreds of forest workers and provide capital to upgrade the rundown Waipa mill, which has been suffering from lack of investment for years. Providing relief of another sort for the industry is the Ministry of Transport decision to approve a law change to the length of logging trucks, following the trial period which has successfully tested the theory that longer, lower loads are the answer to the shocking rollover statistics. Still of concern is just how well motorists will cope with overtaking 22 metres of logging truck on the open road. And the fact that with hectares of mature forest awaiting harvest, there are many low-grade country roads that may not stand up to the expected increase in heavy traffic. It's the control of traffic that is the heart of another June story, one that touches a raw nerve with local lovers of the outdoors. Iconic district landmark Mount Tarawera is no longer to be freely accessible from September, as Ngāti Rangatihi owners hand over operations on the mountain to a contractor, Steve Collins. Claiming increased costs of regulations imposed by OSH, access to the mountain will now only be by paying to join an escorted tour group, for what many locals would consider a fairly steep price. Various recreational walking groups used to unrestricted access are quick to complain about the situation.
These were local good Rotorua people who had walked for years and suddenly had to pay. And I have to say I was deeply saddened, but I also understood iwi's right about one of their assets which they owned. We'd looked at the lakes and here was a mountain. And they were seeing that this mountain had to be looked after, and they got no money from anybody but had to maintain the tracks. That wasn't fair. So I understood their view. I think this was an appallingly clumsy effort. I did go to see Steve Collins at the time. I tried to open and broker open access 3 times a year so that at least the walking groups could get there and locals could have free access. He wasn't going to have a bar of it.
Near the end of the month, there is something for all to complain about. Rotorua gets a reminder that it is indeed approaching the middle of winter. The Met Office and the Daily Post call it a weather bomb. High winds and a deluge of rain rolls across the central plateau, causing flooding and property damage, particularly in the South Waikato. Rotorua battens down the hatches, but also gets its share of the turbulent weather. And the Daily Post has a nice photo opportunity as the post-storm clean-up begins.